We've all probably heard the expression, "a picture can tell 1,000 words," but it's really important to recognize that it can also confuse and mislead. To be convinced of that, all you really need to do is take a look at this graphic, which is supposed to be showing the UK's most popular pizza toppings. But as you can see, there's all kinds of things that make this really confusing. For one thing, typically when we show a pie chart, the individual slots of the pie are showing proportions, but here the proportions being shown don't add up to 100%. The individual slices aren't proportionate to their total of the whole, even though it's supposed to be showing the most liked pizza toppings. If we look down here in the fine print, we see that some of the most popular toppings aren't shown up here at all. So in this case, if what we really wanted to understand is what pizza toppings people in the UK liked most, we'd be much better off with just a list than this confusing graphic. Shortly, we'll be going through a whole bunch of examples of different types of charts and talking about what makes them more clear and what can make them more confusing and what to avoid. But before doing that, I just want to talk about some basic principles of data visualization. And I want to emphasize that my focus is going to be on the type of visualization that's used in deliverables, whether that be a report or an infographic or a dashboard or something like that. We can also use visualizations as part of the analysis process, but normally then those are a little bit more quick and dirty. We're not worried about an external audience, we're just using them for our own purposes. So here we're focusing on communicating results once we have them rather than that analysis process. So when we want to use a visualization that way, the first thing that we want to think about is exactly what results we do want to communicate to our audience. We don't want to be making a visualization just for making the sake of a visualization. We want it to be supporting a point that we want to show about our results. And then we want to consider too how best to communicate the results. A visualization will be the right way in many cases, but in other cases there might be a better way. Maybe for our particular purposes it's better to do it verbally or with text rather than a picture or a chart. So think carefully about those things. We should only be using a visualization if it makes our findings easier for the audience to understand. So in the pizza example, it actually makes the things more confusing. A list would be a much simpler way to find out what are the UK's most liked pizza toppings. So we should only be using a chart or a graph when it's making it easier rather than harder for the audience to understand. The other thing that we need to think about for all of the visualizations we do is how to balance persuasion and precision. Sometimes there's a temptation to want to include every last bit of detail on a chart or a graph, but in some cases that can make things more confusing rather than less. For example, if we're talking to a general audience rather than a very technical one, including a lot of statistical detail might be confusing to them. Now, that's not to say that it's not important to do those statistical methods correctly and well and make sure that the results we're presenting have passed thresholds that they need to pass and things like that. But what it means is we don't need to show all of that detail to the audience if that's not helpful to that particular audience. And that will vary from audience to audience. For example, if we are talking to an academic audience or a technical audience, then adding a lot of that detail will enhance their understanding, not detract from it. So we always need to be thinking about who's our audience, what do they need to know, and how do we make sure that we're using the visualization and the detail around that to give them the clearest picture we possibly can, given their starting point, whatever that happens to be.